Today on Dub World, we're going to be doing the rear wheel bearings on my 1996 VW Polo. Actually, this procedure is very similar to the front on an air-cooled Volkswagen. So if you're ready to check it out, sit back and let's go.
Sure, I wanted to show you guys how you can check to get an idea if a wheel bearing is going bad. So you can lift up your car, but you're going to want to push and pull on the wheel with both hands. See if you feel any movement, if anything's loose in here. If something's loose, it could be just the nut has come undone, or it could be the bearing's going bad. If you're driving the vehicle and the bearing's going bad, you're going to hear a hum. As you can see, the brake drum got a lot of surface rust on it. I'm going to be cleaning it and painting it. So what I've done here is I've taken a metal brush, wire brush, and I've just brushed the surface rust off. I've also used some of the brake clean on here, like you see right here, to clean the drum. So you need to get the grease cap off here. And I would just take a hammer and just slowly tap on it as you're spinning. It'll start to pull out. And there it goes. I can tell the grease is really old in here. So you got to remove the cotter pin. Then you take this crown that goes over the nut. All right, so I definitely would recommend getting new cotter pins if for whatever reason you can't get one. Just make sure you do your best to carefully bend this back. Then you're going to pound it out of the hole. Try to save it. Then we just take this little cap off. And there's your retaining nut. So you want to make sure that there's no play in here. So you're looking right in here. And when you move this drum and you're pulling it back and forth, you want to make sure there's no play. This just needs to be snug so that there's no play. Let me just show you how loose this is. See that? Zero effort at all. It's just snug, like I mentioned. Okay, so there's going to be a washer back here. And as you can see, it's got a little tooth on it. And there's your outer bearing. Which if all goes planned, you pull the drum, everything should come off. The problem with these water-cooled cars, the later model ones, they have self-adjusting rear brakes. So sometimes the drum will want to stick on there. So keep that in mind. It's going to be hard to show you guys this since I'm holding the camera with one hand. But as soon as I pulled this bearing out, do you see this? Do you see how it's moving? That is too much play in there. This bearing is on its way out. See how it's shifting? You might even be able to hear it. But I'm going to clean this and we're going to take a look at it. But I can just tell by pushing it around that it's dragging. All right, so I mentioned that sometimes the drums will stick on here because of the self-adjusting brakes. But the other thing, and this is the same thing you can have with an air-cooled VW, is if this inner bearing is really, really worn, it can stick to the spindle and the drum will want to come off. And that's what we got going on here. Is the bearing is stuck on the spindle. So what you have to do is you've got to gently bang on the drum or use some type of a pry bar, top and bottom, side to side, and just pry on it. This car has really thick backing plates. It's not going to be a problem to pry on it. The Beetles tend to have a little bit thinner ones, so if you're going to do that, be very careful. Wow, so this was a challenge getting this drum off. So, as I mentioned to you before, on these later model water-cooled Volkswagens, you've got self-adjusting rear brakes. So this little tab here, this is what keeps the brakes self-adjusted. So if the brakes are dragging on the drum, like it was here as I was trying to pull the drum off, it was pulling on the brakes, you've got to adjust this. You're supposed to be able to stick a screwdriver through the drum and push up on this thing and release the tension on it. Couldn't get it to move, so I just pulled it off. But anyways, you get the idea. So my recommendation is when you're inside, now's a good time to clean up everything. If you got an air-cooled Volkswagen, you're gonna have adjusters. But just check all the hardware, make sure everything's in place, make sure you don't have any leaking wheel cylinders. I'm just gonna take some brake clean and I'm gonna clean this off, clean the old grease off, and then go ahead and start taking this apart. So pulling out the inner seal, which I use that little screwdriver and this hammer. You just want to see. And where's the inner bearing? So we're going to clean this off and see what it looks like. Kind of hard to see these bearings. Got this in daylight to try to give you guys a better view. But this outer one here, you can see the rust on it. Wasn't getting enough grease lubricating it. The inner one, this one, looks to be in better shape, but if you look on the inside, you can see where it was rusting. The spindle, it's also bent right here, up here as well. These things can fail in different ways. If you inspect them, you can look for grooves, lines in the bearings. If there's any type of chips, grooves, scratches, they need to be replaced. If they're excessively loose, they need to be replaced. Obviously, if they're making noise other than regular spinning noise, they need to be replaced. This one's got a lot of play in it. What happens is these get worn down, and if they get really, really bad, they can come apart. It's just something you can feel. You can feel it just does not roll smoothly. This one here rolls a lot better. But this, it's got a lot of friction to it. You see it doesn't spin all that well. But I would say if you don't know how many miles are on the bearings, it's a pretty cheap replacement item. I would go with new ones. Better to be safe than sorry. If you put new bearings in, keep track of your miles, you'll be able to have a lot of trouble-free driving. So when you go to replace the wheel bearings, you got to install the new bearing races inside the drum here. That means you've got to remove the old ones. So if you look down in here, there's a little notch here, and there's a little notch here. So it allows you to get something in there. Most of the time a screwdriver, this is a punch here. But what you're going to want to do is you get that in there and you're going to hammer it from side to side. Sorry about the light. To get this old wheel bearing raised out. Then you're going to flip it over and take this one out. You got to have your drum lift up off the ground like this. You can put it like I have on two 2x4s. Something so that when you are banging out the race in there, it can go all the way out, because otherwise it's going to get stuck right here at the edge. Now, as you can see here, when I pounded these out, I kind of gouged the inside, and that can happen. Got to be careful. Don't want to gouge it too bad. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some sandpaper in there and smooth it out. Well, thanks to Euro Tuning, I was able to pick up the wheel bearing kits for the Polo today. Didn't have to wait to order them. This comes with everything that you see here. Excuse the plane flying over. But you've got the two bearings. You got your cap, your cotter pin, your little lock crown, and your wheel bearing seal. I did notice that this seal is different in design than the one that was in the drum here, but it does fit. so it doesn't seem like there's going to be an issue. Always recommend save your old parts to match things up just in case. And for some reason, let's say if this seal didn't fit, I didn't destroy the old seal. I could stick it back in until I found something else. But always double check what you have before you leave the parts store. Because the last thing you want to do is get home and find out that you don't have the right part. Now, what you got to do before you put these or put the grease in the bearings is you have to clean them. I've got some brake clean. I'll be cleaning those, and then I'll pack the bearings with grease. Anyway, so here is our drum. We've got the new race that's going to go in this way. Make sure when you're putting these in, you put them in the correct way, otherwise you're going to have to take them out. So it's tapered, bearing's tapered. It's got to fit in there like this. So as you can see, fits in there. So make sure you drive this in the right way. If you don't have one of the tools to pound this into place, which I do, you can use the old bearing race, set it here, put a block of wood on top, hammer it down until you get it started, and then you can just use a hammer to get it laying flat the rest of the way. It needs to be all the way seated to the edge. And again, double check, match the new bearing to your old one, and make sure it's the same size. You don't want any trouble before you go to install it. Hoping you can see down in there how that lip is right up against the edge. See it in here? So this is the tool that I use. It's just a bearing driver. Get this just about anywhere. Super handy. I pounded these in the old-fashioned way for years, and I finally broke down and bought one. It's definitely worth it. Now, I've seen some people put like a little oil WD-40 in here to help them slide in better. You can do that if you wish. Doesn't matter. The point is, this is going to be really tight either way. So let's put this one in. Just takes a few taps and it's in. So as far as grease, I try to use a high temperature grease for these. The very first thing I learned when I was learning how to work on cars was packing wheel bearings. This is one of the most important jobs on a car. He said if you don't do this correct, a person's wheel could fall off and they can have an accident and get killed. So it's important to pack these. Being that I'm holding the camera, I can't really show you the process per se. But what it is, I'll be putting grease in my hand, and then just imagine this is my hand, and I'll be pushing this into the grease, pushing it into the grease until the grease comes out this side, and I'll be spinning it as I do it until the entire thing has grease coming out and it's fully packed. And then once I finish these, I'm going to pack the inside of the drum with grease, put this inner bearing in, the larger one, and then put the grease seal on. This will give you an idea of what I'm doing here. I'm just jamming this bearing into my hand with the grease, and see how it's coming out the top? I'm going to go all the way around until it's completely out. Okay, so you want to get the cavity inside the drum full of grease. Put it in and just lightly tap it around. This is a big hammer, but just lightly tap it around until you see that it's seated all the way. I shoot and edit every one of these videos on my iPhone, and it limits me on how many minutes I can upload to YouTube. So this video has to be broken up into 3 parts. Stay tuned for part 2.